Ken was always grateful for all the blessings in his life. He had a well-paying job at a reputable bank, married the love of his life, Kelly, who loved him equally, and had a 15-year-old son, Simon. Ken always appreciated Kelly for caring for Simon like her own son. Before marrying Kelly, Ken was in a serious relationship with his girlfriend and had been engaged to her. When Simon was born, his biological mother ended the engagement with Ken and left her newborn baby. Ken was devastated when his relationship ended, but he soon found Kelly, who reinstated his faith in love and loyalty. "I am glad to have such a loyal and loving wife," Ken thought as he looked at Kelly helping Simon with his calculus homework. Simon was very close to Kelly. He shared everything with her and loved her dearly, more than Ken. Simon knew that Kelly was not his biological mother, yet he never ceased to respect and love her. Instead, he always expressed gratitude for his stepmother for being so kind and considerate towards him. Moreover, he never tried to imply that she was not her real mother. "Where is my real mother, Dad?" Simon asked Ken when he was 8. "Your mother is in heaven. She left us when you were too young, my boy," Ken told him politely. "Was she ill? Did you take her to the hospital?" Simon asked innocently. Ken remembered how he hesitated to reply. He thought to dismiss the question, but he wanted to satiate the curiosity of his little boy. "Simon, Mom had a tumor. I took her to the best hospital, but she couldn't survive," he explained to him. Simon was quiet for a few moments, and Ken asked him, "Simon, don't be sad. You have a mother and she loves you, right?" Ken asked his son. Simon smiled and replied, "Yes, Dad. My mom is great, and she loves me more than you. But sometimes I just wonder what my biological mom looked like. Do you have any pictures of her?" Simon replied. Ken shook his head. "No, son. It was too painful for me to see the picture of your mother. That's why I removed all her pictures from the house. It helped me overcome the pain of separating from her." Ken was telling the truth this time. Simon smiled and thought that his father loved his mother. "Dad, what are you thinking?" Simon asked Ken, who was thinking about a memory with his son. "Nothing, son. Are you done with your homework?" Ken asked his son politely. "No, Dad. Mom helped me complete all the homework. I need to talk to you about something," Simon said in a low voice. "Yes, what is it?" Ken answered. Simon came closer and said, "Mom's birthday is coming next week. I need to buy her a gift." Ken smiled that his son always remembered Kelly's birthday and anniversary. "Sure, we can go to the mall and buy anything you want," Ken replied. Simon smiled brightly and said, "Mom has been eyeing that black handbag for quite some time now. I'll get it for her. I've saved enough money from my monthly allowance." Ken and Simon decided to go to the mall this weekend to buy gifts for Kelly's birthday. The next day, Simon and his friend went to the park to play. "Hey, Simon, look, that car is back again." Ben poked Simon to make him look at the car. "Yeah, I wonder who is inside that car. And why does it come exactly at 5:30 p.m. when we are here to play?" Simon wondered. Ben and Simon forgot about the mysterious black car and got busy playing. "Hey, Simon, do you want to go and grab our favorite cold coffees from the cafe?" Ben suggested. "Yeah, let's go." Simon agreed, and the boys went to the cafe near the park. Ben ordered his coffee, and Simon went next to order. "I'd like 1 coffee, please," he instructed the barista. "That'd be $8, sir," the barista replied. Simon opened his wallet to take out money, but only had $5. He called Ben to borrow some cash, but he too had nothing extra. "I am sorry. Please cancel my order. I'm short on cash," Simon requested. "It's okay, son. Your coffee is on me." Simon saw a glamorous middle-aged lady giving $10 to the barista. "No, it's okay. I'll get something else." Simon smiled and told the lady. "It's okay, Simon. This is the least I can do for you." She smiled and left the cafe. Simon was surprised at how the lady knew his name. "Hey, Ben, how did she know my name?" Simon sounded confused. "Relax, man. She must have heard me calling you when we entered the cafe," Ben replied, and Simon nodded. After taking their coffees, both the boys went to their homes. "Mom, a bizarre thing happened today," Simon told Kelly as she prepared pasta for dinner. "What happened, Simon?" she asked. Simon told her about the lady who paid for his coffee and knew his name. Kelly looked surprised and then replied, "Simon, Ben is right. She must have heard you talking. But tomorrow, pay that lady back and thank her for her generosity," Kelly instructed her, and Simon nodded. The next day, Simon and Ben were playing in the park when that shiny black car came again. This time, the door opened, and a lady stepped out of it. "Hey, Ben, see, it's the same lady who paid for my coffee," said Simon excitedly. He ran to her and took out his wallet. "Hello, ma'am. Here's the $10 that you lent me yesterday." Simon smiled as he extended the $10 bill towards her. The lady smiled and hugged Simon, who was perplexed. Simon, my son! Oh God! How much I have missed you for the past 15 years! Each day I prayed to the Lord to reunite me with you. He finally answered my prayers today. The lady hugged Simon tightly. I think you are gravely mistaken. I don't even know you, Simon replied as he took a few steps behind. The lady smiled and said, Simon, I am Allison, your mother. I gave birth to you, Allison replied with a broad grin. What? No, this is not true. My father told me that my mother had expired due to a tumor. My biological mother is dead. You are lying, Simon said, turning his back towards Allison. Oh dear, that's what Ken and Kelly told you? They told you that I am dead? I can't believe those two. Allison started crying. If you are my mother, where were you for the past 15 years? Simon asked curiously. Your father loved me, and we were about to get married. But then Kelly came between us and told your father to abandon me. Your father listened to Kelly and broke off our engagement. I begged him not to leave, but he became abusive to me. He hit me badly when I asked him to leave Kelly. Allison sobbed as Simon listened to her. Allison continued, When you were born, I thought things would now work out between Ken and me, but I was so wrong. That evil Kelly told Ken to get rid of me and take you away from me. That's why he hid some cash and your grandma's jewelry in my bag and called the police, Allison said. Simon was stunned to hear all these details. The police arrested me and I spent 3 years in prison. After that, your father issued a restraining order to forbid me from meeting you, my son. But now, after all these years, I am back. I am financially strong and can fight for your custody. Allison grabbed Sam's hand and gently caressed it. I am no longer afraid of Kelly and Ken. I am back, and now I can finally spend the rest of my life with my son. Allison smiled and looked at Simon, stunned to listen to all the details. I can't believe Kelly and Dad would do this to you. Why would they do it? Kelly is a nice woman, Simon asked. Kelly was jealous of me. She had a thing for your father and was adamant about destroying my life to have Ken and you. I won't forgive her. Allison sounded angry. Simon sat on a bench and massaged his temples. How do I know that you are not lying? Simon asked her. Allison replied, I have a DNA test report that proves you are my child. She smiled and rummaged through her purse to take out the report. Simon frowned his eyebrows in confusion. I picked up your empty coffee cup and sent it for testing. I know you are smart and won't trust me that easily. Allison gave the report to Simon. He studied the report and was shocked to learn that Allison was indeed his mother. I don't know what to say. I am sorry for what Dad and Kelly did to you, Simon replied. Allison sat behind him and gently pressed his shoulder. Simon, please come and live with me. I had spent the most difficult 15 years of my life all alone. I missed you every single second of my life. Please don't leave me alone. Allison had tears in her eyes. Simon asked her for a few days to process this information. He went home and slammed the bedroom door with all his might. Kelly knew something was wrong, so she went to his bedroom. Simon, is everything okay, my child? She asked with concern. Simon's blood was boiling at Kelly. He opened his door. Yes, everything is wrong. I hate you and Dad for hurting my mom so much. I wish there were something I could do to punish you. He yelled and looked at Ken and Kelly. Simon, watch it. How are you talking to your parents? Ken asked angrily. Kelly is not my mother. Allison is. She is alive. You lied to me about her, Simon yelled. You hurt my mother, Dad. Took me from her all because of Kelly. He pointed his finger at Kelly, who was crying. Kelly has nothing to do with your mother. And your mother hurt us all, Simon. I loved her, but she deceived me and left you. Ken tried reasoning with his son. No, she told me you got her arrested and then married Kelly, Simon responded. Ken shook his head and asked Simon to calm down. Simon, please relax. I can explain everything. Simon sat on his bed, took a few sips of water, and then looked at his father and Kelly. Simon, what I am about to tell you might hurt you. I hid all of this from you because I knew it'll hurt you. Ken looked at his son and began. Allison and I fell in love right after we finished college. We were mad at each other. We dated for more than a year, and I proposed to her. A year later, we found out that Allison is pregnant with you. She wanted to abort you, but I stopped her. She hated me for that. I tried reasoning with her, but all in vain. I later learned through a friend that Allison had an affair with a rich guy, and she intended to run with him. I confronted her, and she agreed. She said she needed someone who could afford all her expenses, and she only went out with me for fun. Ken stopped for a brief moment. I was hurt. I couldn't force her to stay with me, so we agreed I would keep you and she'd go with the rich guy. But Allison was a greedy woman. She stole my money and my mother's jewelry and ran away. I had to contact the police. That was the last time I saw Allison. I hate her, but I am thankful for her for giving birth to you, my child. Ken explained everything to Simon. The next day, Ken went to the park to meet Allison. He parked his car at the same place where Allison parked. Well, it's good to see you after so long, Allison said with a big smile. Why are you back, Allison? What do you want? Ken asked sternly. Oh, I have been quite bored after Luke's death. But then I remembered I had a son. I could play the role of mother and see how it feels, you know? I want to embark on raising a teenage boy. Allison laughed. So you are back because you are bored. I thought you missed your son, Ken asked. Oh, why would I miss him? I am glad Kelly did the difficult part of raising him. Now he is a big boy, and he can manage everything alone. Plus, he would be good company in my lonely days, Allison replied. Ken's car door opened, and Simon stepped out. Thank you, Mom, for leaving my father. I am glad he married Kelly, who loves me more than you. Goodbye, Mom, Simon said and went back into the car. Ken smiled at Allison and sat inside the vehicle. Allison was shocked and stood there for a few minutes until she realized that her son had finally learned about her past and abandoned her.
When Matthew told his mother that he was getting married to June, his mother and sisters busted into a loud laugh. They thought he was joking, but his straight face showed he wasn't. Why won't you leave this wretched girl alone? What do you see in her? His mother asked in a bid to mock him. Matthew was sure his mother and sisters would kick against the idea, but he had already decided. You won't change your mind, will you? His mother asked, but he said nothing. His mother watched him as he wiped his mouth clean and excused himself from the table where they ate together. He dragged June with him. She had been sitting there the whole time, but Matthew's mother did not mind if she hurt her feelings with her words. When they were both out of sight, Matthew's mother, Marilyn, and his two younger sisters burst out into another laugh. They mocked June and Matthew for thinking they could both get married, even with the vast difference in their social background. Before Matthew announced his intent to marry her, his mother never approved of their relationship. She used to tell Matthew to get someone better, that deserved him, and not some peasant who was only after his money. Being from a vibrant and reputable background, Matthew was the only son of his father, Mr. King, and out of love and happiness for his son's humility, his father willed everything to his name. He left nothing for his mother and daughters, apart from their house, because he was sure they would squander all of his money on shopping and unimportant things, breaking them in a couple of years. On the other side, June was her shoemaker father's first and only child, Mr. Richard. Her mother died when she was still a baby because her father could afford to pay for the proper treatment after June's birth. Since then, they had been struggling to survive together. Mr. Richard did not have the opportunity to go to school, which is why he worked so hard to ensure June completed her education. He believed that educated people had an advantage in the world over uneducated ones. It was June's dream to go to school too. She stopped at high school to save up for her fees. She worked in a small coffee shop in London and worked 13 hours daily to meet her financial target. June was a light-skinned girl with honey eyes, blonde hair tumbling over her shoulders, and a beautiful smile that could melt any heart. She was very hard-working, which was visible from how she worked in the coffee job. She knew her father's small, irregular money would not be enough to send her to school. And because of her cheerful and charming personality, she got lots of tips and encouraging remarks from the customers who stopped by the shop from time to time. The first time she met Matthew, he had come to the shop in the company of his friends. She went to them to take their orders when they were settled in, and their eyes met. For the first time, she became uncomfortable taking a customer's order. Her lower tummy churned at the sight of him, and everyone at the table could tell she was nervous. Matthew noticed her uneasiness, but he could not tell why. He loved her at first sight, but he tried not to show it. That day, she bumped into another customer and spilled hot coffee on her shirt. She apologized quickly, but the customer was already upset. She said many mean things to her and left. The rest of the day, June refused to come out. Her nice boss, Mr. Rowlings, tried to get her out of her bad mood, but nothing worked until he told her she could take the day off and still get her regular pay. And that was how she left. Maybe if she did not leave work early, she would not have met Matthew again. She met him outside taking a call, and he followed her when she saw her going in the opposite direction. He kept calling for her attention, but she ignored him and hastened her steps. She was already embarrassed by what happened and did not want to look him in the eye. She was just about to cross to the other side of the road when she felt a firm grip on her right arm. It was Matthew. She looked up at his face, and the nervousness returned. From then on, they would meet up with each other regularly till they became lovers. As of the time they met, Matthew had just returned from Canada, where he finished a master's degree in business, but she was yet to start her tertiary institution. The first time Matthew invited her to meet his mother and sisters, she could barely sleep the night before. She understood they were from different worlds, and her father often told her, "The rich will always marry the rich, and the poor will always marry the poor." Not that he discouraged her from being with Matthew, he only wanted her to be realistic about her relationship with him. When the day came, she wore the red gown Matthew had gifted her and a pair of black shoes to match. The dinner was set for 7 p.m., but she was already with Matthew by 6 p.m. Everyone could tell she was nervous from the look on her face. Even Matthew occasionally whispered to her, and she would breathe out almost after. Right from the first day, she knew Marilyn and Matthew's sisters would never love her. They teased and mocked her in Matthew's presence till she could no longer take it. Marilyn even asked if she stole the dress she wore because there is no way a low-life like her could afford it. That night, when she went home to her shabby old house, she cried herself to sleep. Now there she was, after 2 years of deliberating if she was ready to marry Matthew and his whole family. She loved Matthew greatly and was not prepared to leave him. He treated her nicely and provided for all her needs. Most importantly, he promised to help sponsor her education at any school of her choice. After giving it much thought, she agreed to marry him and move into their family house. Because of Matthew's nature of business, he was barely at home, and he believed his mother and sister's attitudes would change towards June after marriage. But he was wrong. They only became worse. Whenever he was not around, they would verbally abuse her and subject her to different forms of maltreatment. There's even a time June was sent out of the house and forced to sleep in the horse stable because she spoke back to Clarine, one of Matthew's sisters. That night she cried so much and regretted moving in with them. Other times, Marilyn would order the maids to do nothing, then force June to do all the work. In her own words, June was there for her son's money, so she had to work for it. And because June had no one to stand up for her, she did all the work, cleaned the entire house, and washed all of Marilyn's clothes, even when there was a washing machine. She would go to the market all alone, cook for everyone, including the maids, and by the time she was done having her bath, they must have eaten everything, leaving her to scrap the remains from the bottom of the pot for herself. The most painful of them all was the abusive words Marilyn and her daughters said to her. They should say she would never amount to anything. She was slum material, and she belonged in the slums, and she would never carry Matthew's child because they did not want her bad blood running in her grandchildren. These hurtful words alone lowered her confidence and esteem. All along, Matthew was barely around. He was always running around from place to place to seal business deals, and every time June spoke with him over the phone, Matthew's mother and sisters would stand behind her to make sure she did not tell on them. With every passing day, she grew leaner and looked more malnourished. Meanwhile, Matthew sent in money weekly for her upkeep through his mother. Marilyn continued to get all the money, but she never gave any to June. She told her son June was pregnant, and she needed more money to take care of her and the baby in her tummy. As it would turn out, June was pregnant, but nobody knew, not even June herself. Marilyn claimed June was pregnant to get more money for shopping. She no longer made money from any of her businesses because of her excessive spending and lifestyle, and she did not want anyone to know she was bankrupt. She did not want to go below her usual standard of living, and she did not want to admit it to her son either. She lied about June being taken care of and how he would be so happy to see her when he returned. This encouraged Matthew to send in more money. The thing about Matthew was that he loved to surprise people. He refused to tell anyone the day he returned to London because he wanted to take them unaware, especially his newly wedded wife, whom he barely spent any time with. June was serving her mother-in-law and sisters-in-law when Matthew walked in like an unexpected visitor. When she saw him, she called his name in excitement, but fainted immediately. While Matthew and his family rushed her to the nearby hospital, Marilyn and his sisters came up with 1,000 reasons why she could have fainted, and that was when he suspected something was wrong. But he chose to say nothing until he heard it from the horse's mouth. A couple of hours later, June regained consciousness, and her doctor's report came in too. She was 2 months pregnant, but unfortunately lost it due to excessive stress and poor feeding. Stress and poor feeding? Matthew raised his voice at the doctor, but the doctor walked away. After the doctor left, he looked closely at June, lying quietly in tears. She looked leaner, tired, unkempt, and pale. She looked better in her father's house than when she moved in with his family. He turned on his mothers and sisters, who all wore uninterested looks. From their facial expression, he could gather that they did not care about her, and his mother had been lying about taking care of her. She lied about the money and every other thing. He was also mad at June for not telling him the truth, but after she explained everything, he understood why she couldn't. Matthew decided to move her out of his mother's house at that moment. They relocated to London, where most of his companies were situated. He also hired 2 maids to care for the home while she rested. Later that year, she took in again, and after 9 months, they gave birth to a girl. He also stopped sending money to his mother and sisters. Concerning June's education, she had always wanted to read botany because of her love for nature. 4 years after, she earned a degree and continued with her master's degree, after which she got a job in one of the highest-paying pharmaceutical companies, and the last time she saw Matthew's family was at the hospital. Matthew promised she would never see them again. The last time she heard about them, Marilyn had sold their house and squandered all of the money, and how she moved into a 1-bedroom apartment where she worked as a cleaner in a hospital. Matthew's sisters tried to beg him a couple of times, stalked him on social media, and even hired a lawyer to sue him for abandoning his family. Instead, Matthew reported them for stalking him, and they were forced to sign an agreement stating that they would never come near him, his family, or his property. This way, he could lead a happy life with his family and daughter. Their daughter, Star, grew up to take after her mother's looks and her father's intelligence, and none of her parents mentioned her wicked grandmother and aunties. Her life was better off without them in it. Viva Fiesta! The loud parade passed in front of the house belonging to Jake. The drums rolled, the trumpets blared, and the colors of the costumes worn to honor the heroes that had given their lives in the Battle of San Jacinto made the morning an interesting one. It was early April. The autumn leaves had fallen, with the little green ones slowly spiraling their way into life. Jake stood by the window watching as young people jumped up and down, displaying acrobatic prowess while singing songs of victory. For a moment, Jake forgot he was close to 80 years old, as he saw himself as an 18-year-old once more, adorning the green uniform of the army. He had always loved the parade as it spoke of sacrifices, the ones heroes made and the ones he made for his country. "Jake, you look excited," Martha said as she came to the window to peep out at the parade. "Oh, yes, dear Martha." Jake likes to add dear to Martha's name. It makes her smile. He used to boast to her about how much of a great poet he was. He would then go off in a recitation while having his face animated like a teenager, knowing what love felt like the first time. This always sends Martha rolling. She came to see him as a family since she started working there. Old man Jake has 2 sons, both of whom are not always around. Martha didn't mind being with Jake all day, listening to him tell stories of the past and laughing at his jokes. She got paid, too, at the end of every month. Approaching 40 years, Martha is a geriatric nurse who practices privately. Old man Jake is one of the 4 clients she takes care of, and he is also her favorite. What could be the cause of the excitement? Martha asked. First, watching the fiesta another year in a row is one thing to be grateful about. You know, I fell down the stairs late last year. It was an excruciating hour before the ambulance arrived. And my sons who live with me? Well, an old man cannot ask for more, can he? He broke off with a distant look on his face. An old couple, both gray and waving the American flag, passed with the parade. San Antonio was witnessing another fiesta. It is a practice that has been upheld for more than a century. It would be 2 weeks of displays, parties, and fun. Old man Jake was already beginning to lose flavor in the loud things of life. Or could it be because of his sons? Martha wondered. She watched as he turned away from the window and walked back to his favorite settee. He is also one of the kindest men she met in a long time. His gray hair was packed in a little ponytail, while a golden-rimmed glasses sat on his nose. As evening came, Martha got ready to leave. It had been an eventful day with Jake, talking about the past and advising her about the future. He would always complain about how difficult the world has become for older people. Young ones for whom the old ones lived and fought so they would have freedom treated them bad. His 2 sons, whom he spent money on so they got an education, made things hard for him. They would leave the house every morning and only return in the evening. Whenever they came back, they headed straight to their rooms without as much as an exchange with Jake. This made his evenings lonely. So it was always sunny whenever Martha came around. One morning, 4 days into San Antonio Fiesta, Jake woke up happier than usual. He got out of bed himself without having to ring the bell that would bring a drowsy Liam to his bedside to help him out. Jake went straight to the kitchen and started making chicken fried steak. He also put some coffee beans into the coffee pot and waited for it to boil as he whistled an old tune. The aroma of the food saturated the whole house. This forced Liam and Elijah down the stairs to the kitchen. Elijah is the older of the 2. At 42, he was unmarried, had been to prison twice, and worked in the local club as a bouncer. One would have thought that having been in prison would at least tame him, but it didn't. He still engaged in bar fights and came home drunk to his father. Liam, on the other hand, worked at the thrift shop. He had gone through a messy divorce 4 years earlier. The court granted custody of the 3 boys to his wife. "Dad, I can't remember the last time you cooked," Elijah said, taking a deep sniff of the kitchen. "I remember how we used to cook on Friday nights when Mother was still alive. Don't you bring my wife's name into—" Jake's voice trailed off. "But it's true," Liam insisted. "Of course it is. Rita also didn't allow me to cook on other days. She was a perfect wife and mother. Or was she? Because I keep wondering what happened to you both," Jake said as he arranged plates on the big table in the kitchen. "What are you trying to say, Dad?" Elijah asked, with his arms folded on his chest. "You know, ever since she passed on, both of you care very little about me. You hardly even know I exist here." Jake scooped some soup into a bowl. "Well, we have been busy, Dad. You know, chasing after the American dream. We can't possibly hang around an old man who only has stories from many years ago to tell." Liam dragged a chair and sat in front of the food. "That's because the stories are a part of you boys. Maybe if you had listened better, you would have heard me talk about the little garden behind the house." Jake poured himself a cup of coffee, took his position at the head of the table, and sat down. "We grew up here on the farm, Dad. What story would you want to tell us that we do not know about?" Elijah asked as he stuffed his mouth full of chicken fried steak. "Yeah, I have remembered the garden for as long as I've been here," Liam quipped in between blowing into his cup of coffee. Jake looked at the men and smiled. His eyes carried a glint that was not there in the past. Elijah looked at his father and back at Liam. He wondered what could be going on in his mind. He had never seen his father this excited. Jake brooded and would sit reading all day. He was glad when Martha started coming to the house to look after Jake. There is something about that land, you know, the one that stretches past the garden. It smells of the tender grasses in the morning, the sunflower opening up towards midday and showing its yellowness to the sun, the hug of nature, and the general feeling of being in tune with the universe. A great battle took place on this land, just beyond the garden. It was a fierce battle, cannons boomed, and heaven received souls. It is called the Battle of San Jacinto. Jake went down history lane again. Elijah listened to his father talk, not because he wanted to. What bothered him, or was of interest to him in the story, was the way Jake narrated it. Then that glint in his eyes looked like one that just came upon a discovery. This kept him rooted to his chair. Liam, on the other hand, paid little attention to the story. He calculated how much he would make in the dog race later if he should go to the bazaar. Liam didn't like the part about donating money to charity in Fiesta, but he enjoyed taking from them in races and games that had stakes. Stories were rife about how a box containing gold and pearls with other rare metals was buried in the ground somewhere. My grandfather told my father how he bought the plot because of those stories. He had seen men come to great wealth by striking some hidden treasure. Jake paused dramatically to look at his children. He had their attention. "So," Liam asked. This was a stake more than he would ever get at the bazaar. He never found the treasure. If he never did, why are you telling this story? Liam, you can see why I don't listen to the old man talk. Elijah pushed his chair back. Don't you want to hear the end of the story? That's where the lessons always are. Jake motioned to his son to sit down. After the boy did, he continued. 3 days ago, I was working in the little garden, tending to the flowers and digging up weeds, when my shovel struck something hard. I know there are no rocks around, so I was surprised. I tapped it with my shovel and felt the same hardness, but this time there was an accompanying hollow sound. I dashed to the shed, got a pickaxe, and started digging. Truly, the box came up. I couldn't pry it open, and what gain would it be to me to have all that wealth when I have children who would use it better? The silence in the room was short. Liam was the first to reach his father, while Elijah collected the spoon from Jake and began to feed him. Liam raised his leg and began to massage his feet. Which part of the garden is the box buried in? Did you leave a sign for us to find it? Easy, boys, Jake said slowly. You're the first lot I am telling my discovery. Don't be in a rush. We have the whole day and many more days to ourselves. I don't want you fighting over the treasure when you finally discover it. So I sought the service of a lawyer and had everything written into my will. This means that aside from the house, you got to inherit something substantial. Martha came in that very moment. Jake pointed at her and said, Aside from me, she's the other person that knows about my arrangement with the lawyer. Elijah and Liam were flushed. They had written off Jake and were only waiting around to sell the house, split the fortune, and either gamble with it to gain more or move to another city. The revelation of the treasure was a game changer. Well, for me to call the lawyer when the time comes, you both have to take care of your father and make sure he is happy. I will be the judge, and if you do it well, you know what follows, right? Martha asked. That moment changed everything for Jake. Elijah and Liam broke their bank for him and made sure he enjoyed Fiesta to the fullest. On the last morning of Fiesta, Jake didn't wake up. He had passed on quietly in his sleep with a smile on his face, happy and fulfilled. The funeral happened at the cemetery with Elijah and Liam giving long eulogies. They spoke so passionately of Jake that Martha was almost convinced. The two of them looked sad and appeared to be grieving. But this changed the moment they got back to the house. Pop goes the champagne, and clink the glasses went. Both of them were beside themselves with happiness. As they settled down, Martha came in. Both of them rushed to her. Take it easy. The number of the lawyer is in this envelope, Martha said, handing over the envelope to them and walking out. A few seconds later, reality dawned. There was no will, no inheritance, and Jake had sold the house to Martha. The city had always been reminiscent of romance and love. It always smelled of croissants and coffee in the morning. There were shops with fragrant flowers on the streets. It was along these French streets that Gerald rode to school, then to university on his bicycle. He had a good and wealthy family. The parents loved each other very much. He was the only child in the family. His mom worked as a stylist in a fashion house. She was often approached for advice and services by famous foreign artists. Gerald's father was a jeweler. His work brought a good income. They lived in the city center in a 2-story apartment. Everything went well in their family. When Gerald turned 16, his parents decided to buy him a bike. It had been his dream since his childhood. He never missed a single speedway race. He regularly watched them on the internet. His father sometimes took his son to motorcycle races. No one could have thought that this passion for motorcycles could completely change his fate. One day, as usual, Gerald was returning home from the university on his motorcycle. It was raining cats and dogs. Visibility on the road was poor. The glass on his helmet was heavily fogged up. Without stopping, he tried to rub it with his hand, but that was a big mistake. Gerald skidded and lost control. His motorcycle crashed into a pole standing on the side of the road. When the guy woke up, he was already in the ward of the city hospital. His parents were sitting near him. They looked at their son, barely holding back tears. Their only son was on the verge of life and death. They thought it was their fault and shouldn't have given Gerald the motorcycle at such an early age. According to the law, the rights to motor vehicles were issued until the age of majority, already from the age of 16. And in fact, they considered him still a child. He had little memory of what had happened before the hospital. "Honey, you got into an accident," Mom said in a trembling voice. "How do you feel?" "Where do you hurt?" asked his father. "It hurts everywhere," Gerald said with a smirk, and the parents smiled back. He was a cheerful guy. Gerald never lost his heart. Others could only dream about such an ability, being able to see the problem from the positive side. That accident changed him completely. Gerald's constant mood for the best has sunk into the deep ground. In addition to fractures and abrasions, Gerald's face was severely damaged and disfigured. He was not shown mirrors for a long time to let him recover and not worry ahead of time. He immediately underwent surgery, but it did not significantly change his appearance. When he began to feel better, his parents and the doctor had to tell the young man everything. With that face, he could not measure himself and did not see anything positive anywhere else. His appearance became unrecognizable. How could this happen? Why did they buy a motorcycle for me? Thought Gerald. A few months later, Gerald was discharged. He could walk, eat, and write. He did everything a regular person would do. But his face was not the same. His parents removed all the mirrors in the house. They decided to put it off until Gerald himself would want it. Gerald was often laughed at the university, and he was called a freaky face. Only a few could look into his eyes. It was even worse for the guy. One classmate from the faculty, whose name was Chucky, often bullied Gerald, tossed threatening notes in his locker, tripped him, and called the poor fellow in front of everyone. Gerald felt awkward and flawed, and he could not fight back. Gerald began to walk with his head down, and he grew his hair so that the bangs covered his face. The guy started wearing a bandana on his face's lower part, so he tried to hide his mutilated face. Many teachers have radically changed their attitude towards the young guy. Some began to look at him as an outcast. They often gave terrible marks as the guy stopped answering in the group. He didn't feel like being given special attention. Others began to feel sorry for Gerald, showing his weakness and defenselessness. An intense change in attitude toward the guy were very noticeable. Thus, the guy realized that he would no longer have a life as before, as long as more attention was paid to his face than to himself. One day he came home and told his parents that he wanted to leave the university. "What happened, dear?" Mom asked calmly. "I want to go to a new place." "Which one?" "I want to become a plastic surgeon." Mom was surprised by the step of her son, but she did not question him. It all became clear to her. Gerald's face did not give him peace. He wanted to return to his old life by any means. In such a situation, his mother could only support Gerald. "Good. We will discuss your new class with your father in the evening. Since now is the middle of the year, you must go to paid education or wait another year." "Thanks," Gerald said softly. Parents supported their son in everything from an early age, forbade him little, and spoiled him. And finally, the guy was transferred to the University of Surgery. Students' and teachers' attention to Gerald began to be expressed even worse than in the formal educational institution. He was ready for it. It was important for him to achieve his goal, to correct his appearance, to become the same guy from Paris. Some were interested in his appearance. Others, from the point of view of professional interest, wanted to take a closer look at his face hiding under his bandana. And one day, at one of the lessons, plastic surgery professor Mr. Green called Gerald to the blackboard. In front of the whole class, he asked the guy to take off his mask and show his face. Gerald was entirely at a loss. He tried not to look at students and rarely spoke to them after the accident. And even in front of the whole audience of people unfamiliar to him, Will asked him to reveal his face. He stood in front of the class, revealed his face, and silently left the auditorium. Only in the corridor he heard the laughter of the guys and Will's phrase, which sunk right into his heart. "Anything can be done in your situation, bud. I'm sorry, but you'd better open your face up. You won't walk around with a rag on your face all the time," the teacher shouted after him and laughed at his back. Gerald would not have paid any attention to it. He was used to insults and smirks from teachers and students. But he knew that Mr. Green was a professor of medical science who had been involved in surgery for a long time, especially plastic surgery. Namely, Gerald dreamed of studying with Mr. Green. He hoped that he had a chance to correct his appearance. The guy was ready for hundreds of operations. He was ready to go under the knife, even if they threatened his life. He read a lot about Green and his achievements on the internet. Gerald often looked at the before and after photographs of his operations. The people he operated on changed drastically. Gerald's dreams and goals were shattered in an instant. He asked to be transferred to another group, where he could continue his studies. A drop of hope and respect for his parents, who helped him to enter, gave Gerald a reason to continue what he started. In the university cafe, where he usually dined alone, a girl unexpectedly sat next to him. Her name was Lily. "Hi," she said smilingly. "If you came to laugh at me, then please leave," Gerald said. "I was there. Green did a terrible job," she answered. Gerald raised his eyes, and the guy saw how tenderly and with a pure soul the girl looked directly into his eyes. From that moment, Gerald was no longer alone. Lily became friends with him and did not let the guy get offended. Lily gave Gerald a university tour and showed him how everything worked there. Gerald began to study from the very beginning. Their shared interest in surgery brought them together. He became more confident with Lily, and he began to open up. She always protected him and did not give offense. He started to make friends at the university. They looked at the appearance of the guy differently. In the lessons of anatomy, students had to share a lot. Therefore, the guy's face no longer caused much surprise. A couple of months after graduation, they began to train in medical institutions, and Gerald gained experience from excellent doctors. It was interesting for them to work with him, especially to be always together. They became very close with Lily during this time. They didn't get tired of spending days and nights with each other. 5 years later, Lily and Gerald got married. They managed to start their medical institution up. Gerald's parents helped him. Gerald and Lily had recruited a staff of good doctors. Together, they performed operations, and Gerald and Lily did what they loved. Of course, Gerald's face also got a lot of work done. He had to undergo several operations, which gradually led to miraculous results. It was impossible to restore the face to the ideal, but it turned out close to it. Gerald's beloved wife and his friend from the faculty worked on it together for long hours. They were aces in their field. Gerald completely trusted his friends. Over time, he no longer had those scars and distorted face. Gerald's sense of awkwardness and shyness vanished with them. He cut his bangs and became proud of their work. It was seen as a fundamental change in him, inside and out. His goal had been achieved. The guy's face was back to normal. All his and Lily's efforts were not in vain. Only one thing did not give him peace. More precisely, one person who once tried to kill his hope. It was Professor Will Green. Many years later, he returned to the university and went to Green's auditorium. He was at his regular lecture. Gerald listened to what the professor was saying to his students. He waited until the end of the lecture and approached Green. "Hello," Gerald said. "Good afternoon. Do I know you, young man?" Green asked. "I was at your lecture once, about 7 years ago. You asked me to come to the blackboard and reveal my face to everyone." Green remembered that unusual guy. He was surprised and couldn't believe his eyes. "Everything you said in lectures is old information. Science and technology have already stepped forward," Gerald said. Will Green was offended and depressed at the same time. His scientific work, applauses, and discoveries were a thing of the past. He was a good surgeon, he thought. The key word was. The same could not be said of Gerald. The fate and strong character of the guy helped him become what he was. The support of friends and relatives gave Gerald hope and incentive to achieve his goals. Saying these words, Gerald left the auditorium with a smile on his face. Green was the one who was standing there, shocked and emerging into his deep silence with a sad, smurfy face. Alex would never have thought that his life would end up this way. Attending college and getting a dream degree made Alex believe his life would improve, and right after university, he would find a job and settle. That plan, however, did not work out. Alex drove an Uber every day for over 12 hours and was often bored out of his mind. That a squirrel scampering across a road excited him. The job was quite dull, and it barely paid enough for Alex to be able to survive without starving himself to death. The one rule that Alex had no trouble following concerning his job was that he wasn't supposed to interfere with his customers' private lives. He never had the time, patience, or interest to listen to their stories and show any inclination to know more, especially since he had so much going on in his life. The countless jobs he had applied to had come back with a rejection letter, pushing Alex over the brink, questioning his existence and his will to live. He had no hope left to continue scouting for jobs. He accepted that driving an Uber and barely making enough to pay rent and fill his stomach was what his life had come to and would stay that way for his entire life, even though he put in more effort than anyone his age. The only good thing he was looking forward to was his corgi. His corgi, Milo, had been the best thing to happen to him in his entire life. Not that there were a lot of other life events that he could use as a comparison. His family had died in a car accident when he was just 13, resulting in him having to jump from one foster home to another until he was 18 and had enough money to get an apartment. It wasn't an apartment you would find in a magazine. It was a run-down block of old buildings with more walls with moss than he had ever seen in his life. He lived in the apartment for 7 years, not having the financial freedom to shift to another place that would be slightly better than the dumpster. One night, as the rain beat down on the dark streets with dimly lit streetlights that cast an eerie glow, distorting the road, his lonely life flipped. Like any other day, Alex drove through the city picking up customers, trying to portray himself as a happy-go-lucky guy and dropping those people off at destinations he wished were his final home. The entire day had been exhausting. His morning started with a rude customer who thought they had the right to treat Alex like he was below them. Unless he wanted to lose his job, Alex couldn't do much except listen and try to respond as calmly as he could. Alex couldn't wait to go home and sleep on his couch until he had to wake up and continue the tedious process again. However, the last ride of the day changed his plans, not just for the day, but for his life. He had been waiting to pick up the customer and drop them off at their location without indulging in a conversation. He had developed the habit of tapping his index and middle fingers on the steering wheel as a distraction. All that changed when a girl who looked roughly 19 hopped, sobbing, into the car, asking to be dropped off at a house on the other side of town. She kept looking back towards the place she was picked up from. It reminded him of a fearful animal that would glance behind to ensure the predator hadn't followed it. Ensuring he followed the rules of his work, Alex did not intrude despite being aware that something was wrong. It was hard, very hard, to stay silent. His eyes would move to his rearview mirror to see the girl's state. "He hit me again, Lily. I can't do it anymore. I don't know how much longer I can handle all of this." The girl sobbed into her phone. Her hand trembled with fear. Every word she uttered after that had Alex hooked, and he couldn't help but eavesdrop once he had gotten a good look at how she shivered when she spoke. All he wanted to do was give her the warmest hug he could muster and tell her everything would be okay. As he contemplated the best possible course of action, he decided offering water to the girl wouldn't do any harm, so that's exactly what he did. He grabbed a new water bottle on his dashboard and handed it to the girl without saying anything. She mumbled, "Thank you," before quietly sobbing into her phone. Finally, calm enough to form coherent sentences, she started explaining what had happened over the night to the speaker on the other end. Alex couldn't help but listen to the conversation. The girl's name was Hazel, which Alex had picked up from his client's profile. While she spoke in broken sentences to who Alex assumed was a friend, he could briefly gauge what Hazel was going through. Yeah, he hit me this time. I know, you did warn me. But what am I supposed to do, Lily? He's my father. I can't just abandon him. Yeah, I know. Well, because I didn't finish my chores. I know it's crazy, but my dad was drunk. Yeah, I will call you once I'm out of this Uber. She seemed shaken up by the events that played out, and Alex saw Hazel take deep breaths, trying to calm herself, and was a little satisfied to know that it was working. Seeing the girl in this state reminded him so much of himself and his experience in foster homes. The dark memories from foster care, or Alex's burning desire to help Hazel, eventually pushed him to break the one rule Uber drivers had to follow. Are you okay? Do you need anything?" he said awkwardly. Nothing, she stammered. And Alex didn't know if it was fear or the overwhelming amount of emotion she was going through. "I'm sorry, but I couldn't help but overhear your conversation." "I'm okay, just a little shaken up. Life at home isn't the greatest, and it got unbearable tonight. I had to leave," Hazel replied, sighing deeply, and for a moment, no one spoke. Alex wasn't sure if she would continue, and it seemed like Hazel was trying to calm her nerves by drinking the entire bottle of water Alex had given her. After a few moments, Alex decided to break the silence by asking her if she wanted to confide in him, while letting her know he understood what coming from a broken family felt like, and maybe having someone who's gone through similar experiences listen would help. Alex seemed to be weighing the pros and cons of this, her eyes darting from her hands to Alex until she finally sighed and nodded. My mom died a year ago in a car accident. She was on her way to pick me up from cheer practice when a truck rammed into her, and she passed away right there. I guess my dad decided to blame me for her death, considering she was coming to pick me up. Honestly, sometimes I think he's not wrong. Alex noticed that Hazel's breath rate started getting quicker. He motioned for her to drink water while telling her to take deep breaths. Hazel continued with her story once she had taken a few deep breaths to regulate her breathing. Over the months, he started getting aggressive towards me and made me clean the house and do chores for him that was never up to his expectations. It seems as if he's turning the grief of my mom dying into anger and directing all of it towards me. With tears running down her face, she told Alex how her dad used to be a nice, gentle guy and never expected him to turn against her. Hazel's knuckles went white as she crushed the empty bottle in her hand when she moved on to how abusive her father had become in the last few months. They continued to converse about how she dealt with all of this until they reached her location. Before getting out of the car, she thanked Alex for listening to her, and at that moment, Alex made a decision that changed his and her life. He asked Hazel for an address where they could send each other letters so that he could make sure she was safe. Exchanging addresses, Hazel got out of the car with a smile, her chest feeling light. It seemed as if both of them developed a sibling-like relationship where Alex felt the need to protect Hazel as if she was his little sister, and Hazel felt comforted by Alex, just like she imagined she would feel if she had an older brother. Unfortunately, she was an only child and had no siblings to support her. They started exchanging letters weekly, with Hazel giving Alex the details about her school life, her cheer competitions, and her life at home. Alex made sure to reply to every single letter, cheering Hazel on and motivating her to keep going, even though the situation at her house worsened over time. It gave both of them a sense of peace to know they had another person they could rely on in times of need. It was almost like an intermission, just a few seconds of light in their lives. But like all good must come to an end, their brief period of happiness was crushed when Hazel's father found out about the letters. I'm so stupid, Hazel thought when she came home to realize that she hadn't picked up the letters in the mailbox before leaving for school. Now her dad sat on the sofa in front of the door with the letter she had received this morning opened on the table in front of him, along with all the other letters she had kept in her drawer. He sucked in air through gritted teeth, a sign he was furious. His cheeks were flushed red from the multiple drinks he had had. What is all of this, Hazel? Who is this man you're talking to? All she could do was fall to her knees, apologizing and crying for forgiveness. She knew her dad was more furious that she had told someone else about his actions, and now he would never let her send another letter again. When her dad returned to his room, Hazel picked herself up from the floor, went to her room, and started packing her bag. She sent what she believed to be her last letter to Alex. Alex, this isn't an ordinary letter. My dad found out about the letters we have been exchanging, and now I will never be able to send another one again. This will be the last one. Please look after yourself and don't worry about me. I'll be fine. I'll figure out how to survive. I always do. Please don't reply to this, Alex. I'll get in trouble. Thank you for always being there for me. I'll never forget you. H. As she scribbled the last line, tears splotched the previous line, and all she could think of was if Alex would be able to read the letter. Days go by with no communication between the two. Hazel continued with her life the same as before she met Alex, even though there was a void in her life that she couldn't fill. However, Alex couldn't think straight since he got Hazel's letter telling him not to contact her again. He did not know if she was safe and didn't feel comfortable letting her stay there without any knowledge of her well-being. Alex was driving home when he abruptly made a sharp U-turn and went opposite. His mind filled with determination, he decided to stop by Hazel's house and see how she was doing for himself. He tried to remain patient and forget about her, but those few weeks were the best weeks of his life, and all he wanted was to get that back. Fortunately for Hazel and Alex, Hazel's dad wasn't home when she opened the door to Alex standing on her doorstep. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her eyes wide with shock. "I had to see if you were okay. I was worried," Alex replied, shaking and ruffling his hair. Hazel invited Alex inside since her dad was going to be out late and explained every detail of what had happened the day her dad found the letters. "It got bad. I don't think I can go through it again. That's why I decided to stop sending any letters. I'm sorry for making you worried." Alex felt a sense of anger wash over him as he realized what Hazel, someone he considered his younger sister, was going through while living here. "You must leave, Hazel. It's not safe for you to stay here." He convinced Hazel to leave the house, going to the spare house that she went to when they first met. It took a while to get the point across, but Alex understood how scary the situation might be for her and gave her time to decide while he prepared tea for her. "Okay." A voice echoed through the house and reached him. Hazel had agreed to escape this broken home. Alex helped her pack her bags while she wrote a note for her dad, explaining that she could no longer live here and needed to leave to keep herself sane. Settling in the passenger seat of his car, Alex managed to drop Hazel off at her new house. She got off with the promise that she would continue writing, letting him know she was okay. That night, as Hazel lay in bed without her father looming over her, threatening her with death, she felt at ease, knowing that someone loved her. Alex lay on his couch, and for the first time in so many years, he slept with the happiness that someone was out there who cared for him. Even if his life hadn't gotten better financially, there was someone who was emotionally there for him. Nick and Paul are brothers, but have always been different. Their age difference was 6 years, but their characters differed significantly. Nick started walking and talking early. He was admired by relatives and teachers at school, who also adored him. Nick was given all the things he needed. He excelled in the exact sciences in school. He quickly learned languages. Music teachers praised him. He was obedient and exemplary, and never had behavioral problems. Nick was successful in everything he undertook. He was sent to piano lessons early ages. He graduated from high school with flying colors. At the same time, he also mastered the guitar and violin. He performed at all school parties. Girls fell in love with him from an early age. Paul was born 6 years later. It was immediately apparent that the younger son differed significantly from the eldest. Paul started walking late. He categorically did not want to talk until the age of 4. Nick enjoyed eating healthy porridge. Paul demanded chocolate and sweets, although he had not yet mastered human speech. Nick slept soundly even as an infant. He didn't give his parents trouble. Paul screamed at night, and his mother sometimes regretted that she had given birth to a second child. The eldest son was always praised. They spoke about the youngest son with regret. The boy was hired a nanny, but she could not stand the stress that the restless baby brought to her. When he started to walk, he categorically did not want to obey rules. Nick was constantly held up as an example to Paul. Since infancy, he could not stand his lucky brother. Years passed. The attention of the girls surrounded Nick. He played the guitar very well. He could perform any popular song on guitar and win hearts. He was a welcome guest at any party. He had a lot of admirers. Also, he had a delicate taste. He always looked clean and neat. The girls considered him an enviable groom. Paul changed nannies constantly. No nanny could stand the boy's behavior. He often broke dishes and often freaked out in screams. Paul was in a lot of pain. In all his childhood photographs, he had disgusting snot. He started going to the potty late. His father and mother never raised a hand against Nick. Paul was spanked for every miss he had done. and there were many misdeeds in his behavior. A lot. The teachers at school couldn't stand the guy. He went to the same school as his brother. Teachers constantly compared the two brothers. They wondered how two completely different people could be born into the same family. At school, Paul was constantly bullied by his classmates, but soon the bullying stopped. The guy started fighting early. Nobody wanted to be associated with him. Many teachers said that only prison awaited him in the future. Paul hated Nick. Nick didn't hate his brother. Sometimes he even sympathized a little with him, but he didn't feel much love for him. Nick valued his reputation. The younger brother significantly damaged his reputation. Nick wanted to be a member of the perfect family. Parents fit into the picture of an ideal family, and Paul was a dirty spot in this family. Years passed. Nick had the first girl with whom he wanted to build a serious relationship. But when their mother saw Nick was in love with an ordinary girl, she decided to think twice. It seemed to her that Nick needed someone else. Someone with a slightly higher social status. She was annoyed by Nick's feelings for a girl from a simple family. Isla was a nice girl. She looked lovingly at the intelligent and handsome guy. Nick reciprocated her. Sometimes his mother thought that Isla would have been more suitable for her goofy youngest son. Oh yes, mother would be happy to see Paul with Isla. The girls didn't like Paul. He had difficulty moving from class to class. He studied badly. He often interrupted classes. At home, his father's flogging awaited him every time. He learned to hate everyone. Bad relationships in the family led the guy into bad company. He started drinking and soon lost a large sum of money in gambling. He hid his debts from his parents. He knew they would never help him. At first, Paul tried to win back his money. He sold the gifts he received from his parents and his grandmother. The guys who demanded that Paul repay his debt as soon as possible hinted that he could take his mother's jewelry. They would be enough to pay off the debt. But he could not cross the line. Paul loved his parents. He combined love and hatred for those who were in his family. He dreamed of being like Nick. He wanted to see, in his mother's eyes, the same pride she felt for her eldest son. But all the rounds of applause went to Nick. All the pride went to his older brother. One terrible night, Paul was severely beaten. The guys told the gangsters that a guy owed them money. Anxious parents arrived at the hospital. The father demanded an explanation of why this happened to him. Paul thought bitterly that it was not his condition that worried his parents, but the problems he caused them. He felt that it would be easier for his father and mother if he were killed. Under his father's gaze, Paul admitted that he was beaten for his debts in gambling. His father didn't even scold him. He gave his son a contemptuous look. Later, his parents decided to help their youngest son at home at a family council. Nick objected. He believed that family money should not have gone to support an irresponsible villain. The parents were saving up some money for their eldest son to buy a separate apartment. Nick was furious that all the savings were spent on the youngest son. Paul had a lot of debt. His father found out the total amount and paid off the debts. Nick began to hate his brother even more. Paul felt guilty. Guilt gnawed at him. But still, his parents' attitude killed his sincerity in him. The father called his son to talk when the guy got recovered. The amount that the parents spent on Paul's debts was huge. His father said he had to work hard to return the money. Paul looked at his father in amazement. The amount was so large that it might take several years to repay. And then there was college. His father said that Paul would have to leave for hard work instead of college. A massive construction project was going on in the next town. Strong young people were being recruited there with 3 years contracts. Under the agreement, the workers were fed and provided with work clothes, but they were paid money only after the construction was completed. No loving parent would send their child there. But Paul's father believed the youngest son had to work off the debt that way. Paul was even more disappointed in his parents, but he wasn't bright enough to finish college. He had no plans for the future. So he agreed to the conditions. He thought about how nice it was to not see his parents and Nick for several years, and it was an excellent chance to pay off the debt. The departure of the unloved son took place quickly. Nobody said kind words to him. His mother didn't even kiss Paul goodbye. Nick didn't even talk to his brother, who was away for 3 years. His father briefly wished his son good luck and warned him not to get involved in more problems. The old bus took Paul away from home. The work at the construction site was tricky. He did not expect such difficult working conditions. Food was scarce. His clothes were always dirty. They worked for 60 hours a week in hot and cold weather. His legs and back hurt. Many could not stand it and went home, giving up. But Paul had nowhere to go. To his surprise, he was drawn into the work with his head. The result was challenging and exhausting, but the guy quickly learned to make it easier for himself. He thought for a long time about why there was such a poor work organization at such a large-scale construction. Once the construction manager, Mr. Smith, visited the site. Paul mustered up his courage and approached the chief. Mr. Smith was surprised at the guy's courage, but listened to him. He did not answer his suggestions, but it was clear that the words of the bold young builder made him think. The following day, Mr. Smith brought together the leaders of the construction teams and instructed them to make changes according to Paul's idea. After the meeting, he called the head of the detachment where Paul worked and said the guy should be encouraged. Paul was not just encouraged, he got a real promotion. His work was not so hard now, but he had to work with his brain instead. He heard praises addressed to him for the first time in his miserable life. After a year of hard work, his body became lean, strong, and muscular. His appearance became attractive. There was no exhausting work in the new position for him, but it took a lot of thinking and planning. The guy started reading books about his niche. Knowledge gave him an impetus for new ideas in construction. He became so bold that he called Mr. Smith to talk one day. It was surprising, but John Smith willingly agreed to the meeting. Paul's ideas seemed very reasonable to him. After this conversation, Smith thought the guy's brilliant brain would be helpful to him, not just at a construction site. He offered the guy to work in his office in an excellent managerial position. John Smith was surprised that the guy had no education. He was ready to pay for his college by signing a new contract. Under the agreement, Paul had to work for his company after all the years of research and another 5 years after graduation. The salary offered was high above the average. Paul didn't immediately agree. He could not believe in his strength and mental abilities for a long time. From an early age, he was told he was irresponsible and unlucky. He hardly thought that he could succeed in things. But John Smith, a prominent construction company owner, believed in him. Father, mother, and brother did not believe in Paul, but the millionaire businessman believed in him. The guy agreed to the terms of his boss. His career developed rapidly. The guy became a member of the house of a successful chef. Soon he met John Smith's daughter. He was in no hurry to start a relationship with her. Paul believed that he was unworthy of a beautiful girl from a wealthy family. Stephanie was terrific and educated on the other side. She liked a handsome guy with a muscular physique. All her childhood, her parents inspired her that the main thing in a person is his personal qualities. She was many times made marriage proposals by guys who pursued selfish goals. Her admirers were the spoiled sons of wealthy parents. Her father did not forbid her to make her own choice, but he warned against such a relationship. But when Stephanie fell in love with Paul, her father approved this choice. 6 months later, in a new job, Paul sent his parents the money he owed them. He sent him an even more considerable sum. And 6 months later, Paul married and invited the whole family to the wedding. Mother and father came to a magnificent wedding. They were surprised at how their youngest son had changed. Mother cried and constantly wanted to kiss and hug Paul. In his father's eyes, Paul saw the very pride he had dreamed of getting since his childhood. Also, Stephanie's family became his family. His wife was proud of him. Her father was proud of him. The entire Smith family respected and loved him. Paul did not show that he was indifferent to the feelings of his mother and father. He greeted them warmly and asked why Nick hadn't come. The guy was surprised that the older brother did not attend the wedding, and he was also surprised that the parents were reluctant to talk about the eldest son. After the wedding, his mother and father left for their city. Before parting, they begged Paul to come to them more often. Paul promised, but he knew he would not keep the promise. He wanted to know one thing: his brother. A few months later, Paul and his young wife arrived in their hometown. He knew that his parents had bought his brother an apartment. Paul called his brother and was surprised Nick was glad to see him. But before visiting his brother, he nevertheless visited his parents. The father told his youngest son a heartbreaking story. Nick graduated from college, but was unable to work in his field. He considered himself more intelligent than his superiors, commented to his leaders, and could not hold on to any job. He criticized colleagues, and other employees did not like him. His mother was able to separate Nick from his first love. Nick experienced this shallowness very hard and began to drink. He had no friends because Nick believed that they were unworthy of him. He listened to classical music and read books, and even his friends worked, earned money, and built their families. The women Nick liked didn't even look at him. Nick spent his evenings alone at the piano or with the violin. Every evening he drank alcohol, played music for himself, and hated the whole world. The world was unfair to him. That's what the guy thought. At first, Nick's parents supported him, but he could not forgive them that they spent a large amount on the debts of their younger brother, and this amount was enough to buy Nick a house. Even once he stole jewelry from his mother and sold them. Nick believed that everyone was unfair to him. He was glad to see Paul. Nick was sure that luck fell on his unlucky brother by accident. He expected to see that stupid guy, but with money? He planned to ask his brother for money and perhaps for a good job. Their meeting shocked both. Nick stopped being a handsome guy. From daily drinking, his skin became flabby and wrinkled. The guy no longer had that proud posture. Nick looked older and tired of life, tired of everything. But there was still a twinkle of arrogance in his eyes. When he saw his younger brother, he was shocked. Paul looked robust, young, and lucky. Next to him was a beautiful woman. Nick felt terrible envy, looking at his brother's wife. The brothers hugged. Paul refused to drink. Nick began to complain to his brother about his fate. His apartment was dirty. Paul wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. Stephanie felt a little sick. She was in her second month of pregnancy. Nick worriedly invited Stephanie to lie down. The older brother asked Paul for money, but Paul replied, "Nick, I won't give you money. I'll try to get you a job, but you won't get a prestigious position right now. My company values experience and the ability to work. Also, I see your empty fridge. I will go to the store and buy you some groceries." Nick was expecting something different. Even greater envy and malice settled in his soul. Paul left the apartment, and Stephanie fell asleep on Nick's uncleaned couch. Nick looked at the sleeping girl, and his desire to possess her grew. She was beautiful and rich. He thought for a long time about how unfair life was to him. Paul had been a non-entity since childhood. Stephanie just doesn't know what a real man is, thought Nick, and he went to the sofa where his brother's wife lay. He caressed the sleeping girl and put his hand under her blanket. Stephanie immediately woke up, screaming and fighting back, but Nick used force. Paul was already approaching the apartment with food packages. Hearing screams, he hurried to his brother's apartment. These were the cries of his beloved wife. The door was open. In a minute, Paul pushed Nick away from Stephanie and sat his wife in a chair. With one blow, his brother fell unconscious. Nick fell to the floor and began to squeal in pain. Paul called the police. Nick didn't harm Stephanie and the baby much, but he left a few bruises on her arm. These traces were enough for the police to record the attempted violence. The neighbors heard the fact that the girl loudly called for help. Nick was taken to the police. He was sentenced to prison for attempted rape. The parents of Nick and Paul did not help their eldest son. They finally realized how unfair they were to their youngest child. Soon, a girl was born in Paul's family. Paul's parents wanted to babysit their granddaughter. They tried to get close to their youngest son, but Paul did not want to communicate with them. Finally, he understood one important thing from his life. He believed that his parents betrayed him many years ago. Now, he considered his family, Stephanie, and his baby.